Welcome to Drawing Class 5. Today, instead of going over how to essentially do more value paintings, since we've already covered that pretty extensively, I'm going to start going over some more tips and tricks for drawing anatomy, especially when drawing characters. The first thing that we're going to discuss here is kind of how to measure out proportions for the human body when you're drawing it. So a good trick for this is to do a basic line. Doesn't need to be perfectly straight, but this basic line right here is the top and the bottom of our character. All right, about halfway down this line, there's going to be another line. Now, this line right here is an important one for measuring out proportions because it tells you where the center of gravity is for your character, which is also usually the middle point or the pelvis of a human body. So if we were to have a head right here, right? Head is in line with the top of this line. We're going to come down here, we're going to have the top point of a pelvis. Up here, we're going to do our neck, and we're going to do a shoulder point, a shoulder point. Shoulders always get squared off in a diamond pattern. So you have this that goes here and this that goes here. This is your sternum. This is the top of your collarbone, basically. That's right where it conjoins to the sternum. Same thing over here, and then it comes up to the top of the neck. Everybody has that kind of plateau on their neck. Depending on the angle that you're looking at them, you'll see more or less of it. And you can actually represent that pretty easily. And let's say you have your shoulders here, and then you want to have your collarbone higher and the back of the neck be lower. You can do that. You just have to kind of lower that plane. And then usually the neck at that point would sit kind of like right here. That's if they're like leaning back away from you. If you want to have it more accentuated, then you just move these points further away. So now it's this deeper angle, and then the neck would be right here in the middle. Because the neck, of course, is three-dimensional, so it comes in like this, and then you have the head on top. This would be if someone was like leaning forward towards you like this. That's just a quick tip for how to kind of orient shoulders. Because again, 3 dimensions is what we're trying to represent here. So you have to understand the depth of something in order to be able to accurately represent it on a page here. Which is why we started working with perspective and we started working with orienting things in a 3-dimensional space. Chests are pretty easy. You just kind of block in this kind of ribbish shape. Doesn't necessarily have to be super duper accurate because you're not really going to be working with bones so much as just gonna kind of move this over here more. Again, digital is great for a lot of things. The ability to move the stuff around when you don't put it in the right spot. After I usually get this part of it done, I always also like to go through and I like to add a center point right here. Now what this represents is not only the abdomen, but it also represents a pivot point. So the human body obviously has multiple areas where it pivots from. In this particular situation, since this is an abdomen, these are the areas that the human torso can twist at, it can bend at, can torque, can twerk, all of those areas all right there in the center of that dot, because that's where the soft tissue is that can move around. Your spine is designed to twist at this point. And then you have your pelvis. The pelvis is a pretty basic thing to draw. For a man, usually the pelvis is a little bit skinnier overall. It has a bit of the actual pelvic floor is a little bit skinnier here. The sides of it are a little steeper, and the legs don't come out nearly as much. So if you have your femur bone coming out like this, this doesn't stick out nearly as far. Whereas for a female, you have a much wider pelvic base. The upper slope of the shape is a bit wider like so, and the femur that comes out is going to have a little bit more of a, it kind of comes out like this a bit more. I mean, this is a terrible femur. I haven't, but this usually is represented. I mean, the actual pelvic shape is something more like this, where you got this, and then it comes down like this, and then there's parts on the pelvic floor where it connects into, and then actually a bone that kind of connects across over here, and then there's a bone that like does that. But basically, that's where you get the multiple lumps that come from a person when you're drawing people. That's all the underlying skeletal structure. But to represent it very easily, you just do either a thinner base or a wider base over here. So for this person, we're going to do a female. We're going to do like this. We're going to do the pelvic, we're going to do the leg inserts, pelvic floor. And now you'll note that for this, the pelvic floor, or the center of gravity is actually at kind of towards the pelvic floor. That's actually correct for a woman. For a man, it's a bit higher. You can actually test this yourself. If you are a man, if you go up to a wall and press your legs and butt firmly against the wall itself and then try to bend over, you will fall forward because your center of gravity is actually higher than your pelvis, whereas a woman can actually butt yourself up to the back of a wall and lean forward, and you will not fall over because the center of gravity is actually under where you're bending. So, pro tip about one, just fun party tricks, and two, anatomy in general. So, we got the pelvis here now. So, a good trick for legs, to measure them out, once you've got this area here, we're going to do some basic cylinders for this. So, leg comes down to about a halfway point on here. So the knee is actually going to fall at about a halfway point here. And then this is going to come down to about here. Actually, it's going to come down to a little bit less than that because there's a foot. Feet are definitely difficult to draw. That's going to be covered in the homework more than anything. But you should always be able to, if this was to bend in half, like if it was to go from right here, and follow an arc backwards, it should be able to hit its own butt. You can test that yourself as well by lifting your leg up and trying to kick yourself in the ass. You can do it. If you're not very flexible, I wouldn't recommend doing that because you can really hurt your knee, but that is actually a physical possible thing. Your heel will hit the bottom of your butt. The leg itself, if I take this leg, it should approximate most of the upper part of the body. And that is correct. If you were to pull this knee, from here, it should hit about right here on that person, because that's about where your knee would hit if you were to completely crush yourself forward flat, fold yourself like that. Proportions for arms are almost, I mean, it's a similar idea where you start here, you have a cylinder that comes down, and it ends right about here. Or actually, it ends a little bit higher than that, but it ends right about at the end of the rib cage. If you stick your arm, if you sit up straight and just kind of put your arm right up against your body, you'll find that your elbow is tickling the bottom of your rib cage. That's just where the arm naturally goes. You have your elbow right here. The next part of the arm comes down, and it is exactly the same length as this. If you're looking at this part of the arm, it should be exactly the same length. Because if you fold your arm, you'll note that your wrist is at topped with your shoulder. The hand should come down. Your wrist and everything should fall off of the same line that you were doing for everything else. And the fingers curl kind of up and in generally. Your hand should be at base level with your pelvic base. Your palm, if you were to completely lay it flat while you're going there, if you move it over at that point, you will find that for the majority, your palm will cover almost all of your crotch. And that's because that's the level at which your hands are naturally at that angle. So with that in mind, we can go through and we can flesh out the rest of this character skeleton. And this is a skeleton because obviously there's a lot of detail missing in regards to, you know, bone structure, and there's a lot of information missing in regards to skin. There's a lot of information just generally it's not being portrayed here because this is not an actual character drawing. This is a skeletal pose. This is a pose study, if anything else. So, you know, we're not going to worry about blocking in a ton of detail. We're just going to get the pose the way that we want it. And I think maybe I'm going to have the arm come out a little bit here. And of course, I'm just measuring from here. I'm just doing a basic arcing. So as long as if it arced back in, it would hit there, I know it's the correct shape. We have the elbow here, and I know that it's the same length here. So we're going to do this. We're going to do this. So this is now proportionate because if this were to arc up here, it would be the same size here. And then we're going to do just a very basic do, just like that. And then we can kind of do a very basic humanoid shape kind of thing going in here. And that's a person. Obviously, it's a very rough person, but it is a proportionate person. Proportion is everything. You can mess around with it later if you want to. Like, let's say I want to make this character look younger. Younger characters tend to have a larger head comparatively to the rest of their body. So you just increase the size of the head so that the width of the shoulders isn't nearly as extreme. And now it's a younger character. If you wanted to have it be an older character, something that starts to happen as characters age is their spines start to compress. So they start to have longer arms, and they also start to bend over a lot more because their spine can't support their weight properly. So you see a lot of hunched over characters. That's when you start getting kind of more hunchback shoulders, and their arms tend to be a little bit more gangly, and they kind of like lean forward all the time. But that's just all character design stuff. We'll go over more of that stuff later. Proportion is what we're covering right now. Hand size, a good trick for that is it should be about the same size as the face. So if the face is this size here, the hand should be about that size there. That's not necessarily always accurate. Again, younger characters, depending on how young they are, they'll have smaller hands. If you have an older character, their hands might be larger, but they're going to have a lot more warpity bits to them. Sometimes like arthritis, fingers warp in weird ways as they age. So things to keep in mind for when you're thinking about character design moments in the future, how you're going to actually design those characters going forward. Next, I would like to cover foreshortening. Foreshortening is something that is difficult to master. I still haven't even mastered it, but it is a useful technique. So we're going to use a leg as an example here. So we're going to have this right here. I'm going to have this come back, and we're going to have it kind of attached to a basic pelvic structure here, like so, and then we're going to have a leg that comes down like this from it, and we're going to have it so that from the front, this is what it looks like. So there's a leg. Now, if I wanted to rotate this in space, how do I show this? Now, without foreshortening, you wouldn't be able to physically do that, because if I turned this, if I rotate this in space so it's facing towards us, you're gonna end up having the inability to see most of this part of the leg. So what foreshortening does is it says, okay, I'm going to draw this leg looking at it from a frontal perspective now, right? So we're going to have the knee, we're going to have all this stuff right here. And then we're going to have the thigh. So we're actually going to do a much more head-on version of this again. So there's the thigh. Now you might notice that thigh is much shorter than up here. How is this translated from this, right? Because you're seeing this whole thing in front of most of it. The length of this, you're only seeing essentially just this little part of it right here, and you're seeing just this little part of it right here. And it's receding into space very quickly. And that's where these overlapping lines come from. You're actually seeing the shadow that's being cast by that crux of the leg. The reason why the shadow does a curve like this in front of it is because we're showing that this is in front of it. We're giving you volume information using value. See, all of those things I was saying before, they're starting to make sense now, aren't they? Anyway, so this comes in like this. You can have some major detail going in on the leg. Maybe she has like a really like beefcake kind of leg muscle here. You know, why not? That's just all, again, character design choicing. But yeah, and then you can have the person coming up there. This is a very basic idea of foreshortening. You can do a lot of very interesting things with foreshortening. You can have fists that are coming at the viewer. Just going to do a very, very quick and dirty fist here, using some not necessarily accurate shortcuts. But I can have this be something where it looks like this going into there, and then having a shoulder that's like here with a muscle that comes in like this, and then having a muscle that comes in like this, you know, and then some motion so that it looks like it's moving towards you. But this would be an example of a foreshortened fist coming directly at your face. You're seeing the back of the arm, and actually that would be more of like this right here. But you're seeing the back of the arm here, which is the part of the arm that normally you would be seeing pretty long, but you're not getting that information from this because it's foreshortened. The fist is coming at you, so all you're really seeing is, if I were to draw out the side of the fist here, we're just going to do a very rudimentary here because it's just for illustrating a point, you're only seeing this part of it. The rest of this is being obfuscated from your view in perspective from the viewer's standpoint. So in that particular instance, the viewer's eye is the camera, and the horizon line is wherever in the scene you're looking at. So you've got these invisible guidelines that are telling you, here's the only part of this you'll see, here's the only part of this you'll see. How do you represent that visually? Well, you just kind of draw a little bit of a line that has usually a pretty heavy curve to it because you're kind of bending it around something. Like so. That's essentially foreshortening. You see a lot of foreshortening in faces. You see a lot of foreshortening on hands. You see a lot of foreshortening on feet. You see a lot of foreshortening in general whenever you have a moving character. Something to practice for sure, especially because the next couple of lessons are going to be arms and legs. You're going to definitely want to find interesting poses, interesting shapes, interesting movement for those arms and legs to be in. You want to have them be doing something that's unique so that you can start to really understand and grasp the anatomy of it. I am not going to be forcing anybody to try to draw photorealistic hands or feet. That's going to be a totally separate lesson at some point. I would like you guys to try and draw hands and feet. At the very least, start to get an understanding of the underlying anatomy. As an example for why you want to understand the underlying anatomy of something, I'm going to draw a hand. Most artists hate drawing hands. That's fine, to each their own. However, if you understand the anatomy of a hand, it's really not that hard. So I'm going to take this, we're going to go ahead and we're going to draw a base for a hand here. And you might notice that the front of this hand is curved in a very specific way. It starts to go up here and then curve back over this way. That is because your hand does that. If you kind of look at it, it goes up, it curves up towards the middle finger, and then it curves back down. And that's actually how your hand can close in on itself. That slight angle to it allows it to be able to grasp around objects. You'll note that I've created a curve to the back of the hand. The back of your hand is not straight at all. There's a curve to it. Your thumb starts from the base of your wrist. And then there's a little bit of a thing here where it comes out like this, like so. And then the actual thumb comes out, right? Now, I kind of goofed that because it's at the wrong angle for the way the hand is actually oriented here. But it would be more like this. Like so. Fingers are essentially just cylinders. They are essentially just a cylinder. However, it's good to note that for the same reason I drew this line here, fingers, as well as your hand, has three-dimensional depth. There is actually a plane that exists where shadow falls on a hand. So it's nice to be able to, on a cylinder, just draw a quick line and render that. Just show, yeah, no, okay, that's where this particular finger goes. We have a joint here. Now, if you look at your finger, your second segment of your digit is actually just a little shorter than the first. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that. A little shorter than the first, and we're going to bend it ever so slightly. So that way we get an interesting movement to it. And then the tip of your finger is about half the size of this one here. So we're just going to kind of do over here. Going to kind of shade in some more of the planes that are going on here. And then for the next finger, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do another one. And we're going to kind of make sure that we get it around the same size because we don't want it to look like it's not of this particular hand. So we're going to, again, grab our planes. And this one's kind of going more forward into space away from the viewer. So we're going to make it kind of be going away from us. So we have a bit more foreshortening here. You see, I have this line right here that's covering up here. So you're not seeing the full part of that. Same thing here. And then we're going to actually move this and have a little bit of foreshortening right there where that connects in. We're going to have another cylinder right here. This cylinder is going to come forward a little bit more. And then we're actually going to have just another finger kind of coming and peeking right there. And then over here, we're just going to have a pinky that kind of just comes in like so. Your wrist comes in. There's a little bit of a nodule on the outside of that's where the end of, I believe, the ulna is. I think it's the ulna. Don't quote me on that. And then you can even migrate some of this planular information from here to this arm, so that it all kind of matches. Now, we're going to come through, we're going to make sure that things like this thumb fit proportionally with what we're doing here. So we're going to move this up a little bit. We're going to have the planular information move up a little bit. That changes the shape of the thumb. And there you have a hand. Now, there's no magic trick to doing this. I've drawn a lot of hands. I know what a hand looks like. I know the proportions of a hand, and I know how the anatomy fits together. So I can draw a hand doing things. I can draw a hand grasping. I can draw a hand in almost any particular shape, way, form, or fashion. Now, that's not to say that I don't need references on occasion. It's very difficult to remember what a hand looks like grasping something from the front, mostly because I rarely ever look at a hand grasping something from the front. I know what the anatomy of a hand is, but that doesn't mean I remember exactly how something looks foreshortened in that perspective. So always, if you're not familiar with something, use a reference. Grab a reference. There's nothing, anybody who says that references are cheating are lying to you. But understanding it gives you the ability to be able to go in and just start drawing something without having to stop and say, wait a minute, I don't know what that looks like. I need to go find a reference real fast so that I can draw this very basic part of anatomy. The same thing applies to almost every other aspect of drawing. You don't need to necessarily pull a reference for every aspect of everything involving anatomy. You should be able to remember basically what certain things look like. And you only get that through repetition. So the homework for this week is going to be, I would like everyone to go find 5 legs and draw them in different shapes and forms. Try to find foreshortened ones, but mostly we're going to be focusing on the anatomy of the leg itself and how the actual shape of the leg forms, again, using value studies. If you want, I would also recommend highly going and finding some skeletal structures and starting to understand the underlying skeletons and muscular structure of what you're looking at. Drawing studies of those is also very beneficial to many people. Anyway, that should be it. I hope everybody enjoyed and hope you have a great week. Thanks.